It's against the law to do what these men did to me and make me feel like my work environment was just a place to have sex. I used to hate going to work after I had to deal with this situation with them. It broke my heart. I cried all the way to work, and I was so afraid at work that they were going to say something or do something to me to make me feel worse or worthless more than I am feeling right now. Going through this took 3 years. It took 3 years of my life away from me. And my family suffered, I suffered. I had to be strong, but I was in tears most of the time because I didn't know how to answer the questions to my children. Mommy, why is everybody just looking at you like you're somebody terrible? And I said, I'm not doing anything terrible. I'm doing something for you and all of society. When the lawsuit came out in the newspapers and taking pictures and everything, the neighbors were intimidated, angry, called me all kinds of names. And it's like, these people used to be my friends. Why would they turn on me? I didn't go into this for the money. I went in this to make a wrong right. My reaction when the jury came out and said that I won this case was wonderful. It just made me feel like, wow, that was all worth it. It's just like a big load of stress, and to just know that, you know, you tell the truth and it's going to come about right. And I really would like to see more women or more minorities to come forward and be strong. Just do it. They can't hurt you any more than they already are.
This entire proceeding is ended.
With that gavel, Chairman Joseph Biden ended 3 of the most remarkable days in the history of the Congress. Senators investigating allegations of unwanted sexual advances by a Supreme Court nominee had waded out into uncharted and often seamy waters, hoping to arrive at the truth. But when the hearings ended at 2 o'clock this morning, 33 hours and 22 witnesses after they began, the Senate was right back where it started, having to weigh his word against hers. Anita Hill, a University of Oklahoma law professor, worked for Clarence Thomas during the early 1980s at the Department of Education and at the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. She appeared before the Senate Judiciary Committee to tell her story.
His conversations were very vivid. He spoke about acts that he had seen in pornographic films involving such matters as women having sex with animals and films showing group sex or rape scenes. He talked about pornographic materials depicting individuals with large penises or large breasts involved in various sex acts. On several occasions, Thomas told me graphically of his own sexual prowess. Because I was extremely uncomfortable talking about sex with him at all, and particularly in such a graphic way, I told him that I did not want to talk about these subjects.
Judge Clarence Thomas had appeared to be within days of confirmation to the Supreme Court when the Anita Hill story broke. Now he was forced to return to the Judiciary Committee to defend himself, and did so with a blistering attack against his accuser, his opponents, and against the committee itself.
In the fall of 1991, a stunned and confused nation watched a law professor charge a Supreme Court nominee with blatant sexual harassment on primetime television. Stunned because never before had there been this kind of media attention to sexual harassment. Confused because the lines can seem unclear and sexual harassment is inextricably aligned to perception. Shortly thereafter, the nightly news and national magazines carried stories of widespread sexual harassment and discrimination in the military. Those events brought to light something that millions of Americans already knew. Sexual harassment and retaliation is a pervasive, destructive, social, legal, and ethical problem. And it is a problem which workers have not escaped. Sexual harassment, a form of sex discrimination, and retaliation for reporting it is one of the most persistent and destructive problems in the U.S. workplace. While potentially a problem for both sexes, the majority of sexual harassment is from men to women, and few working women have not experienced sexual harassment. Although sexual harassment is clearly illegal, it continues despite the high cost to the employee and the harassed individual. And despite the protections of the law, many who have been harassed do not bring complaints. Sex role stereotyping, distribution of power, and socialization are among the chief factors contributing to sexual harassment. Filing charges can be humiliating. Victims may feel their charges will be ignored or downplayed, or they may be accused of behavior that invited the offensive conduct. They may be ridiculed, face hostility or retaliation, poor work assignments, reduced hours, poor evaluations, or even the loss of a job. Still others don't know their rights, are confused about where the lines are drawn, or simply don't know what to do. What is clear is that sexual harassment and retaliation is against the law. Since 1964, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act has prohibited discrimination in employment conditions because of an individual's sex. In 1976, it was acknowledged that Title VII also prohibits sexual harassment as a form of sex discrimination. Unlawful hostile environment harassment may occur even where there has been no tangible job detriment, but where sexually harassing conduct is so severe or pervasive that it alters an employee's working conditions.
Today, the Insider Exclusive goes behind the headlines in sexual harassment at work, Denise Paty's story. To examine how Beverly Grant of the Beverly Grant Law Firm successfully won a landmark $500,000 verdict for her client Denise Paty for emotional distress, outrage, and defamation. Beverly Grant has earned the highest respect from citizens and lawyers alike as one of the best trial lawyers in Washington and across the nation. Her goals, not only to get justice for her clients, but to make sure that everyone is treated with equal respect and dignity as guaranteed under the Constitution of the United States. She has built a substantial reputation by consistently winning cases other law firms have turned down. Her amazing courtroom skills and headline-grabbing success rate continue to provide her clients with the results they need and the results they deserve. This is the Insider Exclusive, live from Seattle, Washington. It is my great pleasure to introduce Beverly Grant to the show. Welcome to the show, Bev.
Thank you, Steve.
Tell our audience a little bit about your law practice. What type of practice cases do you usually handle?
My practice consists of mainly high-profile cases focusing on employment discrimination, wrongful termination, sexual harassment, age and race discrimination.
Mm-hmm. And today we are here talking about a landmark case that you handled a number of years ago for your client, Denise Paty, correct?
Yeah, D. Paty, yes.
And she is going to be with us a little bit later, but before we bring her on, tell our audience a little bit about what type of case this was and why was it a landmark case?
Thank you. Dee was a reprographic supervisor at a bank called Puget Sound National Bank. And at the time, it was the third largest bank in the state of Washington. It's now referred to as Key Bank.
Tell our audience a little bit about what happened to Dee at the bank.
Dee was approached by bank officers and told that the only way she could get ahead at the bank was to have sex.
Yeah.
And that
they said that openly.
Openly,
Yeah.
yes. And it was well known that some women, not all, had obliged in that regard.
Yeah.
And she didn't think it was right that she would have to have sex in order to be promoted.
So what happened to her? She's refusing to go along with the program, quote unquote. What happened to her?
Well, she reported it and followed the company's procedures. And supposedly she went to the bank president, she and her husband, and said, listen, these things are happening at your bank. And the president said, no, I've known these two men, Scott and Dick, for a long time. We go out golfing together.
Yeah,
I just don't believe this.
They would never do something.
No, they would never do anything like that. And she was very adamant. The president said, Bill Phillips said he was going to investigate. And ironically, the investigation, no one ever talked to Dee. No one ever talked to any of the primary witnesses that she had. In fact, it was just the opposite. They were just trying to find out what was wrong with Dee, not what her complaints were.
Yeah, and I want to point this out. The reason we do these shows is because oftentimes when someone is harassed, let's say sexually harassed or whatever at a company, they go to the higher-ups, and the higher-ups attempt to placate them, right, by telling them there's going to be an investigation. And think about it this way. It's like the fox guarding the hen house, right? The investigation may not go anywhere, probably won't go anywhere.
Never goes anywhere.
You have to be aware of that. So what happened? She went to the bank president. He said he'd investigate. What happened then?
Well, oftentimes they placate the victim, and they pretend like they're doing an investigation when one isn't actually done. In her particular situation, no one actually investigated. They went through the motions of an investigation, but they never talked to Dee. They never talked to any of her witnesses, and they just swept it under the rug.
So here's the key question. She's still not playing ball with the officers, the bank officers who sexually harassed her. She's reported it, right? Do they continue to sexually harass her?
Oh, here's the fun part. What they did was they retaliated against her, all right? So all of a sudden, this person that you've given several raises to is no longer your ideal employee. And so you find things that she's doing wrong, and you find that she's totally undesirable, and you find that you make her working environment so untenable that no reasonable person would want to stay there.
Right.
That's what they did.
And how long did she last under those conditions?
Not very long, I tell you that. She's a pretty strong woman, but she couldn't take it anymore.
So she finally had enough and she quit.
She quit.
Yeah. And then how did she end up coming to you?
Well, I'm not too sure about that, but all I know
She knew
is...
she had some legal issue and case that she possibly could prove, right?
Right.
Okay.
I don't, you'll have to ask her how she came to me, but all I know is her case was so unique, and that the factual pattern, I would lead parties at 2 o'clock in the morning and go to my office and work on her case.
Yeah.
It was that...
Why was it so unique? I mean,
it was unique because in the state of Washington, the term sexual harassment was an anomaly. No one had ever heard of sexual harassment.
And this was a number of years ago.
Yes, yes. And in fact, that was one of the arguments that was raised by defense counsel, that there is no such thing as sexual harassment. Luckily for us, Governor John Spellman had a resolution saying that sexual harassment is a form of sex discrimination.
Right. So we were able to proceed on that basis. And that's why this became a landmark case.
It became a landmark case for several reasons. One, I ended up being asked to speak to what was then called the American Trial Lawyers. And have you ever been in a room with a group of predominantly men, and you're trying to explain this term, sexual harassment, and they're saying, you mean someone can sue me for saying inappropriate things to an employee or grabbing on some body part of a woman?
Right.
How ridiculous is that? They couldn't grasp the situation.
Yeah, this case came down to basically he said, she said. You know, the bank officers denied any of this, correct?
Right.
So what was the smoking gun, if you will?
Well, I think the smoking gun was several things. He said, she said. Usually you're dealing with the credibility of the parties.
Yes.
And the number one. Number two, we had a unique situation because Dee and her husband went to the bank president, reported it, and he started taking notes. And he said that the notes were taken contemporaneously with what the report was. I subpoenaed those notes, and there was something odd about those notes. I don't know about you, but when you're interviewing someone, don't you want to know what they're saying, not what they don't say? Mm-hmm. Well, these notes were written in the negative.
Right.
Instead of saying D said XYZ, they said D didn't say XYZ, and they tracked the complaint.
Right, right. And this was a jury trial, right?
This was a jury trial.
Okay. So the jurors were able to see, wait a minute, this is fabricated, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
And they were able to see there wasn't any investigation to really show any credence because no one ever talked to the key parties.
Right. What was the end result of the case?
The end result was the jury awarded $450,000 for sexual harassment, an additional $50,000 for defamation, and then there was a lodestar added on to for attorney's fees. So the total verdict or judgment was $610,000.
Okay. Well, congratulations.
Well, thank you.
Okay.
At that point in time, in the state of Washington, there had been only 3 known reported cases, all involving school teachers. The average was 80,000.
Yeah. Do you find since that time that sexual harassment cases are easier to represent and prosecute successfully?
No, it's still the same. The Old Voice Network is still alive and well, and one would have hoped that I would have been out of business doing this type of practice.
Right.
But it's more prevalent, even more so, especially with young females.
We have your client with us today, Dee Paty, so let's bring her on. It is my great pleasure to introduce Dee Paty to the show. Welcome to the show, Dee.
Hi, Steve.
Tell our audience a little bit about what was it like to endure this sexual harassment at this bank?
It was pretty horrendous.
Yeah? What they
It hurt so bad you don't think about it.
Yeah. I mean, you were there to do a job, right?
Yeah, and I loved my job. I love my job.
Yeah.
I still miss it today.
Yeah. How
But-
long had you been at the bank before one of the bank officers approached you and said, "This is the deal"?
Maybe 8 months,
Really?
6 months.
That long?
It was kind of gentle.
Yeah.
Well, because the innuendos come up first.
Yeah.
And you kind of like, oh, that's a little strange. You know, you shouldn't talk to me like that. You know.
Yeah.
You're not my husband. But they wouldn't quit. The more they drank, the more verbal they were.
Yeah. These guys went out for the 3 martini lunches
Oh,
and
yeah.
came back. So when you were first approached, you went to other female coworkers.
Yes.
And did they help you any? Did they
Well-
advise you any?
Basically to shut up
Yeah.
and don't rock the apple cart.
Right.
Just leave it alone. And basically they wouldn't
Yeah.
admit to anything.
Right.
And I thought, well, maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm imagining this. But then I got mad
Yeah.
because I thought, man, I don't want my children coming into this work world with having to go through
Yeah.
what I'm going through.
Now, you went home every day
Oh,
and
yeah.
you told your husband what was going on. What did he say?
Well, at first it was kind of weird because I knew he'd have my back, but there was a little doubt. So it kind of puts in a little wedge in your marriage.
Yeah.
Because there's maybe a little disbelief.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like he really didn't believe me, but he did. He had my back.
Yeah.
And but my children and the neighbors were horrific to us. Just treated me like terrible, terrible, terrible.
You mean when you told your children and your friends
Yep.
you were the bad guy?
Yes. Always the bad
Seriously?
guy. Always the bad guy because
Really?
I'm supposed to just keep my mouth shut and go along with the big boys club.
So what was the final straw?
I'd had enough.
Yeah.
I read my journal and I found bad.
And you were recording everything. What was going
Yeah,
on?
oh, my journal, I have
Really?
a book.
Everything they said.
Oh, everything, the date, the time. Well, I was also
Yeah.
cross-training.
Wow.
I was also cross-training my crew.
Yeah.
Because in case I was gone or someone was gone,
Right.
someone could do their job, and then all of a sudden, it became a journal of
No,
truth.
Bev, let me ask you. That was used as evidence. And,
Oh, absolutely.
okay.
I mean,
and it's so detailed.
It is.
Everybody got to believe it, right?
Yeah.
it was great.
Yeah.
It was great.
So you finally resigned, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I quit. I'd had enough. I couldn't.
Yeah.
I had stomach aches. I mean, I was crying. By the time I got to work, I was in tears, and I was threatened, and I was
Yeah.
scared. I don't like people thinking of me like that.
Sure.
It's like,
So how did this develop into a lawsuit? How did you meet Bev?
I went to a law firm, and I said, all I have is my journal and truth.
Right.
And they just kind of laughed at me,
Yeah.
all these men. And then finally, they just pushed me on to their measly little token here. That's how she felt in that office.
Really?
But
They
I didn't care.
referred you to
Yeah,
her.
well,
Okay.
yeah, because my case, all I had was my journal.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's the only thing, the
And,
truth.
and at that time, this is a number of years ago,
Yep.
but at that time, sexual harassment really wasn't defined as we talked about before.
Wasn't heard of.
So how long did the case take from beginning to finally you got a verdict?
I think it was like 3 or 4
3
years.
years.
I'm not sure.
And during that time, you went out and got another
Oh,
job?
yes. I made my own job. I did printing,
Yeah.
subcontracted printing out, and had my own
Yeah.
job.
How did that affect your personal life at home?
Terrible. I couldn't walk down the street. I couldn't go into a bank. No one would hire me, so
Because you were blacklisted.
Yeah, I was blackballed.
Yeah.
Totally blackballed.
But what about your relationship with your husband at the time?
It was,
I mean, you know, you've quit your job,
yeah.
and you've cut off a source of income.
4
That
kids.
affects, you know, everything.
Yeah, we had house payments, and
Yeah.
so I moved my business into my house. I took one of the bedrooms and
Yeah.
just got to work. I had to do something. I couldn't just sit around. Yeah, I have my 4 little kids, but that wasn't enough.
Yeah.
I liked working.
So finally you got a great verdict.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it was just all with truth. Nothing, no play acting, no nothing. Just
What did you feel when the jury came back?
elated.
You did?
I knew before they made the verdict that we were going to win.
Yeah,
I
good.
just knew it. I just knew it.
That's good. That's good. Well, you know, we congratulate you, both of
Yes.
you, you know, on that verdict, because that made history here.
Yes.
Was that the first sexual harassment verdict in the state of
No,
Washington? Pretty
no,
close to it.
it was about the third. As
Pretty
I
close to
indicated
it.
before, there were
But
others.
people stood up and paid attention, didn't they?
They did.
Yeah.
They did.
So
Yeah.
how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I
Yeah.
feel strong.
Yeah.
I learned a lot.
Yeah.
Truth.
And the
Truth is
people who
truth.
doubted you before now believe in you.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
good. That's good.
It's awesome.
Well, I want to thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you.
You're an inspiration to everybody.
Thank you.
You know,
I hope a lot more people come forward.
yeah, and they will because of you. I know you went through, you know, a lot of tough times,
Yeah.
but hey, you got the kind of verdict that was the truth. as
It's
you
worth
said.
it.
So thank you.
Thank you very
Thanks for being
much.
on the show. So, Bev, let's talk about the people who are watching this show right now. There's plenty of women out there that are being sexually harassed at work, and what should they do about it? How would you best say that the definition of sexual harassment is?
The definition of sexual harassment is unwanted, unwelcome advances of a sexual nature.
Yeah.
They can take place physically, by touching, unwanting touching,
Yeah.
or verbally by sexual innuendo or very sexually explicit terms.
Yeah. I've watched a number of television programs, and I see a guy comes by a girl, and he says at the office, a fellow employee says, "Hey, good looking." And some women might interpret that as sexual harassment. Is that sexual harassment?
Well, the sexual harassment, you have to look at the totality
Yeah.
of the circumstances. Unless it's very, very egregious, one particular comment won't do. And I want to point out something. It's not only men who are sexually harassing women, but actually there are men who get sexually harassed by women.
Yes.
Now the difference is most men are too embarrassed to report it.
Yeah.
I wish they would, because whether you're a man or a female, it needs to stop.
Yeah, and there's 2 other categories: men sexually harassing other men, and women sexually harassing other women.
That's true.
And that goes on a lot too.
Absolutely.
And oftentimes, when somebody is sexually harassed and they don't respond in the manner that the harasser wants them to, oftentimes they are retaliated against, especially if that person is a supervisor of them, correct?
Well, it's about power.
Yeah.
It's about control.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we're addressing a national audience right now. What should a person do, male or female, if they feel that they have been sexually harassed?
Well, the case law is very explicit. One, they need to report it.
Yes.
Report.
To whom?
They should report it either to HR, or if it is their supervisor
Yeah.
who is conducting the harassment,
Yes.
just go up to the chain of command. But the
Yeah.
most important thing is so that everyone doesn't get amnesia.
Yeah.
I always tell them to put it in an email, put it in writing.
Right.
Keep a diary or a log of the date and the event
Right.
that occurred and who was around and what was said.
And submit that to what, HR?
Yeah, submit it to HR,
Yeah.
and you can also submit it to the CEO.
Yeah.
There can't be enough people you report it to, but you have to report it.
Are they required by law to get back to you within a certain time frame?
Not necessarily. Both in California and Washington, they're not. You would hope that they would conduct an investigation expeditiously, but sometimes the wheels of justice move extremely slow, and that
Yeah.
could be months or sometimes a year.
Yeah. Now, as in Dee's case, there was an investigation that was heavily biased towards the supervisors, the bank officers. If you feel that the investigation is really a sham, what should you do next? If you're not getting the right response, from your company, what should you do next?
Well, there are several things you can do, and you can do them simultaneously. One, are you a union member? You can file a grievance to your union. Simultaneously, every state has a state human rights commission or the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Different forms, but the result is similar. Those agencies use your tax dollars to investigate the particular allegations. There's also a lot of time women and men are fearful of reporting these incidents. They need the money. Some of them are single parents, and they rely upon it having their job. One of the things you can also do is file for unemployment. Because the employer has to show that you committed misconduct, you see, in order to justify its either termination of you, or if you quit, there's constructive discharge as well.
Okay, so when should a person seek out the legal assistance from a lawyer like yourself?
Well, I wish they would seek out assistance immediately when they think that they are being the victim of sexual harassment. A lot of times they're not too sure because they don't know if this is just an isolated incident or they haven't been treated bad. They're just being invited to come out to dinners or go out to the local chalet or wherever.
One of the things I want to point out in cases like this, anytime you have trouble at work and you report on your supervisors to somebody higher up, the atmosphere that you work in is generally going to be tougher. You're going to be retaliated against, etc. So my recommendation to everyone, and I'm sure you said the same thing, is seek out a lawyer right away.
Yes.
Because, you know, these are cases, you handle a lot of discrimination cases, and it does take a long time to process these, go to court, try to seek some sort of settlement, and change the environment where the person works, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay, and one last thing. You have a lot of people contact you regarding, you know, usually employment cases or any kind of cases. How do you select your clients?
I'm really, really particular. I don't take everyone who calls me or seeks my assistance. I have to believe in my client. I have to believe that they're telling the truth. There are some people, I had a case where in the middle of the deposition for the first time, I find out that she had made her employer a cake, and it was in the shape of a penis. Had I known that, I would have never taken that client.
Right.
I think those type of cases harm those legitimate cases.
Yeah, I want to thank you very much for being on our show.
Well, thank you.
You've really illuminated a lot of things that people should know, and we'll have you back again.
I hope so.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.